Chapter 1. The Tide Brings Secrets. Hercule Poirot adjusted his pristine Homburg hat, shielding his eyes from the sharp glare of the late afternoon sun as the train rattled to a stop at St. Azure's modest station. The air carried the briny tang of the sea, mingled with the faint scent of fish and tar from the nearby docks. He stepped onto the platform, his polished shoes clicking against the weathered wood, and surveyed the scene with his characteristic precision. Azure, with its quaint charm and bustling pier, was not the sort of place one associated with crime, yet Poirot's little grey cells were already stirring. Captain Hastings, his old friend, had insisted on this so-called holiday, but Poirot suspected there was more to the invitation than a mere escape from London's fog. "Mon ami, you have chosen a most picturesque retreat," Poirot remarked, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon where the sea met the cliffs. Hastings, bounding forward with his usual enthusiasm, grinned broadly. "Isn't it splendid, Poirot? Fresh air, the sound of waves, and not a worry in sight. You shall see. A week here will do wonders." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile, though his mind was less convinced. He had received a letter 2 days prior, slipped into his coat pocket by an unknown hand at Victoria Station. The message, written in a hurried scrawl, read, "St. Azure hides secrets. Come quickly, or blood will stain the shore." It was unsigned, and Poirot, ever distrustful of anonymity, had packed his valise with both curiosity and caution. A holiday, perhaps, but one that promised to engage his intellect. The pair made their way to the Azure Inn, a charming establishment with whitewashed walls and a view of the pier. The innkeeper, Mrs. Tuttle, a stout woman with a nervous habit of twisting her apron, greeted them with forced cheer. "Welcome, gentlemen. The best rooms as requested, overlooking the sea." Her eyes darted toward the window, as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the waves. Poirot noted her unease but said nothing, instead complimenting the inn's tidy appearance. "It is most orderly, madam." A place of calm, no doubt. His tone was probing, and Mrs. Tuttle's smile faltered. "Oh, yes, sir. St. Azure is quiet, save for the fishermen's chatter and the odd squabble among the gulls." She laughed, too loudly, and Poirot's gaze sharpened. The evening unfolded with a stroll along the pier, where the town's life pulsed. Fishermen hauled nets, their hands calloused and their voices rough with sea shanties. Wealthy vacationers, draped in summer linens, sipped cocktails at the Seagull's Rest, a cafe perched precariously over the water. Poirot observed them all. The young couple whispering conspiratorially, the solitary man in a dark coat staring at the horizon, and the group of merchants arguing over prices. Each face, each gesture, was catalogued in his mind, a tapestry of potential motives waiting to be unraveled. Hastings, ever the optimist, pointed to the cliffs in the distance. "Look, Poirot. Those paths lead to hidden coves. Perfect for a bit of adventure, eh?" "Adventure, Hastings?" "Non. The sea is beautiful, but it is also deceptive. It hides much beneath its surface, just as people do." Poirot's voice was soft, but his eyes were alert, scanning the crowd. As dusk settled, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a commotion broke the evening's tranquility. A fisherman's shout echoed from the rocky shore below the cliffs. "A body! There's a body!" The words cut through the air, and the pier's chatter fell silent. Hastings, ever impulsive, grabbed Poirot's arm. "Good heavens, Poirot! Let's go see." They hurried toward the shore, joining a small crowd gathering around a jagged outcrop where the tide lapped gently. A man lay sprawled on the rocks, his fine suit soaked but not from the sea. A dark stain spread across his chest, and a dagger protruded from his heart. Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The man was middle-aged, with a stern face and a gold watch glinting at his wrist. His eyes, wide open, stared blankly at the sky. "Not drowned, Hastings," Poirot murmured, his voice steady. "This is murder, and a deliberate one. The dagger is no fisherman set's tool. It is elegant, precise. And see, One shoe is missing. Most curious, the crowd whispered, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. A woman, her face hidden by a veil, sobbed quietly at the edge of the group. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the elegance of her posture despite her grief. A policeman arrived, a young constable named Barrett, who seemed overwhelmed by the scene. "Mr. Poirot, sir, we've heard of you. Can you help?" Poirot inclined his head. "I shall observe, constable, but first tell me, who is this man?" "Mr. Reginald Vance, sir," Barrett replied. "A merchant wealthy owned half the fishing boats in town. Not everyone liked him, mind you." "Indeed," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "And where is his other shoe?" The constable blinked, confused, but Poirot was already examining the surrounding rocks. A faint mark in the sand caught his attention, a curved line like the edge of a circle, half erased by the tide. He straightened, his mind racing. "Hastings, this is no accident. The sea may bring secrets, but it is on land that this crime was born." As the crowd dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the shore. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now, its warning prophetic. Sardo, with its charming facade, was a puzzle, and Reginald Vance's death was merely the first piece. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation. The holiday was over before it had begun. The chapter closed with the sound of waves crashing against the rocks, a rhythm that seemed to whisper of more secrets yet to be uncovered. Poirot, standing silhouetted against the fading light, knew that St. Lazare held a web of lies, and he would untangle it, thread by thread. Chapter 2. The Widow Sipt's Veil. The morning sun cast a golden sheen over St. Azure, its rays glinting off the sea as if to mock the grim discovery of the previous evening. Hercule Poirot sat in the Azure Inn's modest parlour, his breakfast of café au lait and a perfectly symmetrical croissant untouched. His mind, however, was far from idle. The murder of Reginald Vance, stabbed on the rocky shore, was a puzzle that demanded his little grey cell's full attention. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, buttered his toast with unnecessary vigour, his face alight with curiosity. "Poirot, what a start to our holiday! A murder right under our noses. Who do you suppose did it? A jealous rival? A scorned lover?" Hastings' voice was almost gleeful. A trait Poirot found both endearing and exasperating. "Patience, mon ami," Poirot replied, his moustache twitching. "The truth does not reveal itself through speculation but through observation. We must begin with those closest to the victim. Madame Vance, the widow, awaits us. Her grief, or lack thereof, will tell us much." The pair made their way to Vance Manor, a stately home perched on a bluff overlooking the sea. Its whitewashed walls and sprawling gardens spoke of wealth, but the air within was heavy with tension. Eleanor Vance received them in a drawing-room adorned with nautical paintings and heavy velvet drapes. She was a striking woman in her late 30s, her auburn hair pinned beneath a black veil that did little to conceal her composed demeanour. Her eyes, though red-rimmed, held a sharpness that Poirot noted immediately. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady. "This is a terrible shock. Reginald was a complicated man, but I never imagined such an end." "Madame," Poirot began, his tone gentle yet probing, "permit me to offer my condolences. But I must ask, when did you last see your husband?" Eleanor Sip's fingers tightened around a lace handkerchief. "Yesterday afternoon. He said he was meeting someone at the pier. Business, as always. He was often secretive about his dealings." Poirot Sip's eyes narrowed, and his mood, was it unusual? She hesitated, then shrugged. He was agitated, perhaps. Reginald had many enemies. Business rivals, you understand. His fishing empire was not built on kindness. Hastings leaned forward. "Enemies, Mrs. Vance? Anyone in particular?" Eleanor's gaze flicked to the window where the sea churned restlessly. "Mr. Lionel Drake, for one. He owns the rival fleet, and despised Reginald for undercutting his prices. Then there's Miss Sylvia Harrow, a former acquaintance of my husband's. She was seen arguing with him last week. And perhaps Mr. Thomas Reed. His accountant, Reginald, threatened to sack him recently. Poirot catalogued the names, his mind already weaving connections. Merci, madame. And one final question. Did your husband own a pair of shoes with a distinctive mark on the sole? A circle, perhaps? Eleanor frowned. I'm not sure. Poirot smiled enigmatically. A small detail, nothing more. We shall trouble you no further for now. Leaving the manor, Poirot and Hastings walked to the shore where Vance's body had been found. The tide had washed away much of the scene, but Poirot knelt by the rocks, his gloved hands tracing the faint outline of the circular mark he had noticed the previous night. This mark, Hastings, it is not natural. It is man-made, perhaps from a cane or a tool, and the missing shoe, most significant. It suggests haste or intent. Hastings scratched his head. A cane? Précisément, Poirot murmured. We must observe. Their next stop was the pier, where the town sip's gossip hummed like the gulls overhead. Poirot approached a fishmonger, a wiry man named Mr. Cobb, who was gutting mackerel with practiced ease. Monsieur Cobb, you knew Mr. Vance. Did he walk the shore often? Cobbester's knife paused. Aye, he did. Always strutting about, like he owned the sea itself. Heard him arguing with Drake 2 nights ago. Right here, something about a contract. Drake was red in the face. And Miss Harrow? Poirot pressed. Cobster's eyes darted away. She sips a fiery one. Saw her slap Vance once. Near the seagulls sips rest. Said he sips ruined her. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. The pier was alive with activity. Vendors hawking wares, children chasing crabs, and vacationers strolling in blissful ignorance of the murder. Yet Poirot sensed the undercurrent of unease, as if the town itself held its breath. Their inquiries led them to the Seagull's Rest, where Miss Sylvia Harrow sat alone, nursing a glass of sherry. She was younger than Eleanor, with a defiant tilt to her chin, and a dress that spoke of faded elegance. Poirot approached with his usual courtesy. Mademoiselle, I am Hercule Poirot. May we speak of Mr. Vance? Sylvia Sept's lips curled. What Sept's to say? He was a snake, promising the world, and delivering nothing. I haven't seen him in days. Yet you argued with him recently, Poirot said smoothly, perhaps about a broken promise. Her eyes flashed. That's Sept's my business. I didn't Sept kill him, if that's Sept's what you Sept thinking. Poirot inclined his head, noting her clenched fists. As they left the cafe, he murmured to Hastings, She hides much, but her anger is genuine. We must learn what promise was broken. The day waned, and Poirot returned to the crime scene, his mind turning over the clues, the missing shoe, the circular mark, the widow's calm, Sylvia's fury, and Drake's rivalry. He stood by the rocks, the sea's rhythm steady and indifferent. A glint in the sand caught his eye, a tiny pearl, likely from a woman's accessory. He pocketed it carefully, his thoughts racing. Hastings, he said, this murder is not a crime of passion alone. There is calculation here, a plan. The sea may wash away traces, but it cannot hide the truth from Hercule Poirot. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Saint-Eustache, Poirot felt the weight of the anonymous letter in his pocket. Blood will stain the shore. It had, and he suspected more would follow, unless he unraveled the town's secrets. The widow's veil, he mused, hid more than grief. It concealed a motive, and he would find it. Chapter 3. Shadows on the Cliff. The cliffs of St. Ashwa rose like silent sentinels above the restless sea, their jagged edges softened by the morning mist that clung to the coast. Hercule Poirot, clad in a meticulously tailored overcoat, stood at the cliff's edge, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The wind tugged at his mustache, but his composure remained unshaken. Beside him, Captain Hastings shivered, less accustomed to the bracing sea air. Poirot, this is a wild place, Hastings remarked, peering down at the waves crashing against the rocks below. No wonder the locals talk of ghosts and smugglers. Did you hear that nonsense at the inn last night? They say a figure was seen up here the night Vance was killed. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Ghosts, mon ami. Non, non. The shadows on these cliffs are cast by the living, not the dead, and it is these shadows we must pursue. His mind returned to the clues from the previous day, the missing shoe, the circular mark in the sand, and the pearl found near Vance's body. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," echoed in his thoughts, urging him to unravel St. Augeur's secrets. The pair followed a narrow path winding along the cliff's edge, where gorse and heather clung stubbornly to the rocky soil. Below, hidden coves dotted the shoreline, their entrances veiled by the tide. Poirot had heard whispers of smuggling in Secluded, Azure, a trade as old as the cliffs themselves, and he suspected Vance's wealth might be tied to more than fish. The path led toward the lighthouse, a solitary tower perched precariously at the cliff's highest point. Its beacon, now dormant in the daylight, had guided ships for decades, but Poirot wondered what else it had witnessed. At the lighthouse door they were met by Mr. Amos Finch, the keeper, a wiry man with weathered skin and eyes that darted like a cornered animal sips. His hands, stained with oil, fidgeted as he greeted them. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings. Not often we get visitors up here. What brings you?" Poirot's gaze was steady. "Monsieur Finch, you are the guardian of this coast, are you not? You see much from your tower. Tell me, did you see anything unusual the night Mr. Vance met his unfortunate end?" Finch Hearth, Sept's jaw tightened. "I keep to myself, sir. The sea Sept's my business, not the town Sept's." He turned, gesturing toward the lighthouse Sept's spiral staircase. "Care to see the view?" Poirot accepted, noting Finch's reluctance. The climb was steep, the air growing colder as they ascended. At the top, the view was breathtaking. The sea stretched endlessly, its surface broken by whitecaps, while the cliffs curved toward hidden coves. Poirot's eyes, however, were drawn to a ledger on a small table, its pages marked with cryptic notations. "Your log, Monsieur Finch. May I?" Finch hesitated, then nodded. Poirot flipped through the pages, his fingers pausing on an entry dated the night of the murder. Light flickered. "Figure on cliff path. 11 p.m. A figure, you say?" Poirot's voice was soft but insistent. "Describe it." "Couldn't see much," Finch muttered. "Too dark. Cloaked, maybe." Moved quick toward the cove, Hastings leaned forward. "Why didn't you report this to the police?" Finch shrugged, his eyes avoiding theirs. "Didn't seem important? People wander the cliffs sometimes." Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet a man was murdered that night. Most curious. He closed the ledger, his mind cataloguing Finch's evasiveness. As they descended, Poirot's sharp eyes caught a glimpse of something caught in a crack near the staircase, a scrap of dark blue fabric, torn and weathered. He slipped it into his pocket, unnoticed by Finch. Outside, Poirot led Hastings toward a path descending to one of the coves mentioned by the locals. The trail was treacherous, strewn with loose stones and slick with sea spray. Hastings grumbled, but Poirot's focus was unwavering. "The cove, Hastings. It is a place of secrets, smugglers perhaps, or a meeting place for those who prefer the shadows." The cove was a narrow crescent of sand, hemmed in by towering cliffs. The tide was low, revealing tide pools and seaweed-strewn rocks. Poirot examined the ground, his gloved hands sifting through the sand. Near the water's edge, he found another clue. A cigarette butt, its brand foreign to St. Augeur's shops. "This," he said, holding it up, "is not the work of a fisherman. Someone with means was here, and recently."
Hastings frowned.
"You think Vance was involved in smuggling? That's why he was killed." Poirot. Sumser's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami. Or perhaps he knew too much. The fabric, the cigarette, the figure on the cliff. These are threads in a tapestry. We must weave them together." As they climbed back to the cliff path, the wind carried a distant shout. A fisherman below waved frantically, pointing to the sea. Poirot's gaze followed, but the waves revealed nothing. "The sea keeps its secrets well," he murmured, "but the cliffs betray them." Back at the lighthouse, Poirot paused, studying Finch's silhouette against the tower. The keeper's connection to Vance was unclear, but his unease suggested knowledge, perhaps dangerous knowledge. Poirot recalled Eleanor Vance's mention of her husband's enemies. Lionel Drake, Sylvia Harrow, Thomas Reed. Could Finch be linked to one of them, or was he a player in a larger game? The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. Poirot stood motionless, his mind racing. The scrap of fabric matched no clothing he had seen yet, but its quality hinted at wealth. The cigarette suggested an outsider, or someone with access to exotic goods. And the ledger's entry confirmed a presence on the cliffs that night, a presence tied to Vance's death. "Hastings," Poirot said, turning toward the town. "We must learn more of Monsieur Finch-Seb's habits, and we must visit the cove again at night, when the tide is high. The shadows on the cliff have much to tell us." As they descended toward Saint-Exur, the sea roared below, its voice both a warning and a challenge. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with purpose. The murder of Reginald Vance was no simple crime. It was a knot of motives and secrets, and he would untangle it one clue at a time. Chapter 4. The Fisherman Sep's Tale. The docks of Saint-Exur buzzed with the rhythm of the sea, nets slapping against wooden boats, gulls screeching overhead, and the low hum of fishermen's voices bartering over the morning's catch. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the salty air, navigated the bustling pier with Captain Hastings at his side. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the weathered planks, and the scent of fish and tar clung to everything. Poirot's sharp eyes darted from face to face, seeking the truth hidden in the rough-hewn features of Saint-Exur's working folk. The murder of Reginald Vance, stabbed on the rocky shore, was a puzzle with too many pieces missing, and Poirot suspected the fishing community held some of them. "Mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his hat against a gust of wind, "the sea is the lifeblood of this town, and these fishermen know its secrets. Reginald Vance owned half their boats. Did he not? We must listen to their tales, for even the simplest story may hide a motive." Hastings nodded, though his enthusiasm was tempered by the fishy odor. "Right, Poirot, but these chaps don't seem the talkative sort. How do you plan to get them chatting?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a knowing smile. "With charm, Hastings, and the promise of attention. Men who work the sea love to tell their stories, if one knows how to ask." They approached a group of fishermen mending nets near a weathered schooner named the Salty Maid. Among them was old Tom Brodie, a grizzled man with a face like tanned leather and hands scarred from years of hauling lines. His reputation as the town's unofficial storyteller preceded him, and Poirot had heard whispers of his sharp memory and sharper tongue. Brodie eyed the pair warily as they approached, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the air. "Good morning, Monsieur Brodie," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Captain Hastings. We seek to understand the late Monsieur Vance. You knew him well, I presume." Brodie puffed on his pipe, his eyes narrowing. "Knew him? Aye, I knew the man. Owned my boat, didn't he? Half the fleet, too. Not a soul here hasn't cursed his name at some point." Poirot leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "And why such curses? Was he not a generous employer?" Brodie snorted, spitting into the sea. "Generous? Vance was a shark. Squeezed every penny from us, then sold our catch to fancy restaurants for a fortune. But he wasn't set just about fish, mind you. Heard things. I did about his dealings in the coves." Hastings perked up. "Dealings? You mean smuggling?" Brodie's eyes flicked to the other fisherman, who had fallen silent. "I ain't saying nothing firm, mind, but Vance was seen at the coves late at night with men who weren't fishermen. Shady types from out of town. 2 nights ago I heard him arguing near the pier, loud enough to wake the gulls. As exos." Poirot's interest sharpened. "An argument? With whom and about what?" Brodie shrugged, but his hesitation betrayed him. Couldn't see the other fellow clear, too dark. But Vance was yelling about a delivery gone wrong. Sit sounded like he was owed money. The other chap said something about Sit cutting losses Sits before storming off. Poirot sipped. Little grey cells hummed. A delivery gone wrong could tie to the smuggling rumours and the cigarette butt found in the cove. This argument, Monsieur Brodie, where exactly did it take place? By the old jetty near the Seagull Sept's Rest, Brodie replied. Sipped, but midnight, I reckon. I was checking my traps. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. And did you see Monsieur Vance after this argument? Brodie shook his head. Nay. Next I heard, he was dead on the rocks. The conversation was interrupted by a shout from a nearby boat, where a young fisherman struggled with a tangled net. Poirot seized the moment to observe the docks more closely. The jetty Brodie mentioned was just visible, its weathered posts jutting into the sea like crooked teeth. Nearby, a pile of crates bore the mark of Vance's company, but one crate, half hidden behind a tarp, had a different stamp, a stylized anchor Poirot hadn't seen before. He made a mental note to investigate it further. As they walked toward the jetty, Poirot Sip's keen eyes caught a discrepancy in Brodie Phipps's tale. Hastings, he murmured. Monsieur Brodie claims he was checking traps at midnight, yet the tide was high then, covering the traps. Why was he truly at the jetty? Hastings frowned. You think he sits lying? Not lying, perhaps, but concealing. Poirot corrected. He knows more than he says. We must watch him. At the jetty, Poirot examined the ground, his gloved hands sifting through the sand. A faint scuff mark, barely visible, matched the circular pattern near Vance's body. Regardez, Hastings, he said, pointing. This mark again. It is no coincidence. A cane, perhaps, or a tool used by our killer. Hastings squinted. A cane, like the one Lionel Drake carries. Precisement, Poirot said. Or perhaps another. We must not assume too quickly. The jetty offered a clear view of the cliffs and the lighthouse, its beacon now a faint glow in the daylight. Poirot's thoughts returned to Amos Finch, the evasive keeper, and the scrap of fabric found at the lighthouse. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern, but the picture remained incomplete. Was Vance's death tied to smuggling, a business rivalry, or something more personal? As they returned to the docks, a young boy ran past, clutching a fishing line. He tripped, and a small object fell from his pocket, a brass button with an anchor motif, identical to the crate's stamp. Poirot picked it up, his eyes gleaming. This, Hastings, is no fisherman's button. It belongs to someone with connections beyond Saint-Azure. The sun climbed higher, and the docks grew busier. Poirot stood motionless, his mind weaving together the threads. Brodie's tale, the circular mark, the anchor-stamped crate, and the button. The fishing community, he realized, was a microcosm of Saint-Azure's secrets, and Vance's death was the key that would unlock them. Hastings, Poirot said, turning toward the inn. We must learn more of these faux deliveries, Sut, and we must revisit the cove, where the sea hides what the docks reveal. As they left the pier, the sea roared behind them, its voice a constant reminder of the secrets it guarded. Poirot's resolve hardened. The fisherman's tale was but one thread in a tangled web, and he would unravel it, no matter how deep it ran. Chapter 5. The Locked Room Riddle. The Azure Inn stood bathed in the pale light of dawn, its whitewashed walls a deceptive beacon of calm against the restless sea beyond. Hercule Poirot sat in the inn's parlour, his café au lait cooling untouched as he reviewed the clues amassed thus far: a missing shoe, a circular mark, a pearl, a scrap of fabric, a foreign cigarette, and a brass anchor button. The murder of Reginald Vance was a puzzle of many pieces, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight with the challenge. Captain Hastings, ever the eager companion, paced nearby, his breakfast abandoned, in favour of speculation. "Poirot, this case is a devil of a thing," Hastings said, running a hand through his hair. "Smugglers, rivals, scorned lovers. Where do we even begin?" Poirot Sip's moustache twitched. "We begin, mon ami, with precision. The truth lies in the details, and today we shall seek them at the inn where secrets gather like dust." Their conversation was interrupted by a piercing scream from upstairs. Mrs. Tuttle The innkeeper burst into the parlor, her face ashen. "Mr. Poirot! Captain Hastings? It's terrible, Mr. Reed. He staros dead, in his room, and the door was locked." Poirot rose swiftly, his eyes sharp. "Show us, madame, at once." They followed Mrs. Tuttle to the second floor, where a small crowd of guests whispered nervously outside. Room 12. Constable Barrett was already there, fumbling with a ring of keys. "Doorsteps locked tight, sir," he said to Poirot. "No one sept's been in or out since last night." The door, sturdy oak with a brass lock, yielded only after Barrett's efforts. Inside, Thomas Reed, Vance's disgruntled accountant, and a suspect in the first murder, lay sprawled across the bed. His face was contorted in a grimace, a single stab wound to the chest mirroring Vance's fate. The room was tidy, its single window bolted shut, and the key lay on the nightstand. Poirot's gaze swept the scene, noting every detail: the faint scent of seawater, a curtain cord tied in an unusual sailor's knot, and a smudge of sand on the floor near the bed. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, kneeling beside the body. "Another murder, and in a locked room. This is no coincidence, Hastings. The killer is bold, but not infallible." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "But how, Poirot? The door was locked, the window bolted. No one could have gotten in." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is the riddle we must solve. A locked room is not impregnable. It is a challenge to the intellect." He examined the body closely. Reed's suit was crumpled, as if he had been disturbed in the night, and his watch had stopped at 2:17 a.m. Poirot sniffed the air, confirming the briny scent. Seawater, Hastings. Most curious in a room so far from the shore. And this knot, he pointed to the curtain cord, tied in a complex figure-8 pattern. It is not the work of an amateur, a sailor perhaps, or one who knows the sea. Constable Barrett scratched his head. But how did the killer get out? There seems no other way in. Poirot moved to the window, inspecting the bolts. They were rusted but intact, showing no signs of tampering. He turned to the door, running his gloved fingers along the lock. No scratches, no forced entry. The key was inside, yet the murder was committed. This suggests planning, not passion. Mrs. Tuttle wrung her hands. Mr. Reed was quiet, kept to himself. Paid for a week's stay in advance. Last I saw him was at supper, looking nervous. Poirot nodded. "And who else was in the inn last night?" "The usual guests," she replied. "Miss Harrow was in the lounge. Mr. Drake dined late, and Mr. Finch stopped by for a drink before heading back to the lighthouse." Poirot's interest sharpened at the mention of Amos Finch, the evasive lighthouse keeper. "Monsieur Finch was here." "At what time?" "Around 10, I think," Mrs. Tuttle said. "He left before midnight." Poirot filed this away, his mind returning to the scrap of fabric from the lighthouse and Brodie's tale of an argument at the jetty. He examined the room further, noting a single chair slightly askew and a faint scuff on the floorboard near the wardrobe. Opening the wardrobe, he found nothing but Reed's clothes, yet the sand smudge extended inside, as if something had been dragged. "Hastings," Poirot said, "this sand is not from the insept's floors. It is coarse, like that of the cove. Someone brought it here, perhaps on their shoes, or something else." Hastings frowned. "You think the killer came from the cove, but how did they lock the door from the outside?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "That, mon ami, is the heart of the riddle. Consider a locked room may be locked by design to mislead. We must look beyond the obvious." He stepped outside, addressing the gathered guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, remain calm. Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth. For now, please return to your rooms." As the crowd dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the sea visible through a hallway window. The tide was rising, washing away traces of the night's secrets. He recalled Eleanor Vance's composure, Sylvia Harrow's anger, Lionel Drake's rivalry, and now Finch's presence at the inn. The anchor button and foreign cigarette suggested an outsider, but the sailor's knot pointed to someone with maritime knowledge.
Hastings.
Poirot said. Descending the stairs, we must revisit the cove and the jetty. The sea connects these crimes, and the locked room is a puzzle within a puzzle. The killer believes they have outwitted us, but they have not reckoned with Hercule Poirot. The town was abuzz with panic, whispers of a serial killer spreading like wildfire. Poirot, undeterred, felt the weight of the anonymous letter in his pocket. Blood will stain the shore. 2 deaths now stained Saint Azure, and the locked room was a taunt, a challenge he would meet with his unparalleled intellect. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Tearoom. The Seagull's Rest Tearoom, perched on St. Azure's bustling pier, was a haven of refinement amidst the salty chaos of the docks. Its lace curtains fluttered in the sea breeze, and the clink of porcelain teacups mingled with the distant cry of gulls. Hercule Poirot, resplendent in a tailored suit, sat at a corner table, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. Captain Hastings, less at ease in such delicate surroundings, fidgeted with his napkin, his enthusiasm undimmed by the grim shadow of 2 murders, Reginald Vance on the rocky shore, and Thomas Reed in a locked room at the Azure Inn. Poirot. "This is a change of pace," Hastings whispered, eyeing the delicate sandwiches. "Do you really think we shall learn anything here? These people seem more concerned with scones than secrets." Poirot sipped, mustache twitched with amusement. "Mon ami, it is in such settings that the mask slips. The Tearoom is a stage, and our suspects are players. Observe their gestures, their words, and what they do not say. The truth hides in the silences." The occasion was a tea gathering, hosted by Miss Clara Beaumont, St. Azure's resident socialite, whose wealth and charm made her the town's unofficial queen. Her invitation had extended to the key figures in Poirot's investigation: Eleanor Vance, the composed widow; Sylvia Harrow, the fiery former mistress; Lionel Drake, the rival merchant; and to Poirot's surprise, Amos Finch, the evasive lighthouse keeper. The innkeeper, Mrs. Tuttle, hovered at the edges, serving tea with a nervous smile. The gathering was ostensibly a charitable event for the fishermen's widows, but Poirot sensed an undercurrent of tension, as if each guest knew more than they let on. Miss Beaumont, radiant in a lavender dress, greeted Poirot with a dazzling smile. "Mr. Poirot, how delightful that you could join us. St. Azure is honored to have such a mind among us, especially in these troubling times." "Madame, the honor is mine," Poirot replied, his bow precise. "But I confess, I am here not only for your excellent tea, but to observe. 2 murders demand answers, and I suspect they lie close to this table." A hush fell over the room, broken only by the clatter of a teaspoon as Sylvia Harrow set her cup down sharply. "Must we speak of such things?" she snapped, her eyes flashing. Reginald Tist's death was bad enough, and now poor Mr. Reed, it sets too much. Eleanor Vance, her veil lifted to reveal a calm face, sipped her tea. "Sylvia, dear, we must face facts. Mr. Poirot is our best hope to end this nightmare." Poirot noted the exchange, his gaze lingering on Eleanor's steady hands. She was too composed, he thought, for a widow of 2 days. Lionel Drake, seated across from her, cleared his throat. "I agree. Vance was no saint, but Reed, he was just an accountant. Why kill him?" "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "because he knew too much. Monsieur Reed was privy to Monsieur Vance's sister's finances. Secrets that might incriminate another." Drakesep's face reddened, and he tugged at his collar. "Nonsense. Vancep's business was cutthroat, but murder? That's a stretch." Finch, silent until now, shifted in his seat. "People talk too much," he muttered, his eyes fixed on his teacup. "The sea keeps secrets better than this town." Poirot sipped, interest sharpened. Finch Sept's presence at the inn the night of Reed Sept's murder, combined with his cryptic ledger entry, made him a figure of suspicion. "Monsieur Finch, you speak of secrets. Did you see anything from your lighthouse that might illuminate these crimes?" Finch's hand trembled, spilling tea. "I told you I keep to myself. The cliffs are no place for idle wandering." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Poirot's attention never wavered. He observed Sylvia's nervous glances at Drake, Eleanor's subtle smirk when Miss Beaumont mentioned Vance's generosity, and Mrs. Tuttle's habit of lingering near the table, as if eavesdropping. The tea-room's elegance, its polished silver and starched linens, contrasted with the veiled accusations swirling among the guests. As Miss Beaumont rose to propose a toast, a soft clink sounded near Sylvia's chair. Poirot's eyes darted to the floor, where a small locket lay, its chain tangled. He retrieved it discreetly, noting its intricate engraving, an anchor matching the button found on the docks. Sylvia's face paled as she touched her neck, realizing her loss, but she said nothing. Poirot slipped the locket into his pocket, his mind racing. Was it hers, or had it been planted? The tea concluded with polite farewells, but Poirot lingered, his gaze sweeping the room. He approached Mrs. Tuttle, who was clearing the table. "Madame, you hear much in this tea-room. Did Monsieur Vance or Monsieur Reed ever speak of a locket, or perhaps an anchor symbol?" Mrs. Tuttle's hands froze. "Not that I recall, sir, but Miss Harrow was here last week, arguing with Vance. Something about a gift he sept given her. I didn't sept hear more." Poirot nodded, his thoughts turning to the locket's significance. It tied to the anchor button and the crate on the docks, suggesting a connection to Vance's shady dealings. The sailor's knot in Reed's room and the seawater scent hinted at a maritime link, perhaps smuggling, as old Tom Brodie had implied. "Hastings," Poirot said, as they stepped onto the pier, "this locket is a key. It belongs to someone at that table, and it links to our murders. We must learn its story." Hastings frowned. "Sylvia sets, you think?" She looked guilty when it fell. "Perhaps," Poirot mused. "But guilt is a mask worn by many. We must also consider Monsieur Drake, Seps's agitation, and Monsieur Finch Seps's silence, and Madame Vance. Her calm is unnatural. The sea roared below, its waves a constant reminder of St. Ashwa's hidden depths. Poirot's little grey cells hummed, weaving together the clues: the missing shoe, the circular mark, the pearl, the fabric, the cigarette, the anchor button, the sea-water, the knot, and now the locket. The tea-room had revealed more than tea. It had exposed alliances and betrayals, and Poirot was one step closer to the truth. As they walked back to the inn, the pier bustled with life, but Poirot's focus was inward. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had foretold this bloodshed, and he sensed the killer was watching, waiting for his next move. The Poirot's whispers were but a prelude to the storm that lay ahead. Chapter 7. The Smuggler Seb's Cove. The moon hung low over St. Azure, casting a silver sheen across the restless sea. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the cliff path, his polished shoes incongruous against the rugged terrain. The wind whipped at his coat, carrying the sharp tang of salt and seaweed. Beside him, Captain Hastings clutched his hat, his face a mix of excitement and apprehension. The investigation into the murders of Reginald Vance and Thomas Reed had led them here to a hidden cove, rumored to be a smuggler's haunt. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with anticipation, piecing together the clues: the missing shoe, the circular mark, the pearl, the fabric, the cigarette, the anchor button, the sea-water scent, the sailor's knot, and the locket dropped in the tea-room. "Poirot, this is madness," Hastings whispered, peering down the steep path to the cove below. "It sits pitch dark, and those rocks look treacherous. Are you sure about this?" "Mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice steady. "The cove holds secrets the killer does not wish us to find. The sea may hide them, but Hercule Poirot will not be deterred by a few rocks." His eyes gleamed, reflecting the moonlight. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had foretold this mystery, and the cove, mentioned by old Tom Brodie and hinted at by Amos Finch's ledger, was its heart. The descent was perilous, the path slick with spray and crumbling underfoot. Poirot moved with surprising agility, his focus unwavering despite the darkness. Hastings, less sure-footed, muttered about the folly of nighttime adventures. The cove emerged as a narrow crescent of sand, hemmed by towering cliffs and lapped by the rising tide. The air was heavy with the scent of brine, and the waves' rhythmic crash masked any sound of their approach. Poirot's gaze swept the cove, noting the shadows cast by the cliffs. "Regarde Hastings," he murmured, pointing to a pile of seaweed-covered rocks near the water's edge. A hiding place, perhaps. He knelt, his gloved hands sifting through the debris. Beneath the seaweed, he uncovered a wooden crate, its lid marked with the same stylized anchor as the button and locket. The crate was heavy, secured with a rusted padlock. "Hastings, assist me," Poirot said, producing a small tool from his pocket, a testament to his foresight. The lock yielded with a groan, revealing a stash of documents wrapped in oilcloth. Poirot's eyes scanned the pages. Ledgers detailing shipments of unlisted goods, coded letters, and a map of the coast with marked coves. One name stood out: Vance Enterprises. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. Monsieur Vance was indeed entangled in smuggling. These documents, they are a motive for murder. Before Hastings could respond, a shadow moved at the cove's edge. A figure, cloaked in dark clothing, emerged from the cliffs, a glint of metal in their hand. "Poirot," Hastings hissed, grabbing his arm. The figure lunged, and Poirot, with a nimbleness that belied his fastidious appearance, sidestepped, pulling Hastings behind a rock. A knife thudded into the sand where they had stood. "Stay down, mon ami," Poirot commanded, his voice low but firm. The figure hesitated, then fled toward the cliff path, their footsteps swallowed by the waves. Poirot's heart raced, not from fear but from the thrill of the chase. He scrambled after the figure, but the tide was rising, and the path was treacherous. By the time he reached the cliff's base, the figure had vanished into the night. "Blast it, Poirot, they are gone." Hastings panted, catching up. "Who was that? The killer?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his breath steady, "or a guardian of these secrets. They knew we were here, which means our inquiries are noticed." He retrieved the knife, its handle plain but sharp-edged, and pocketed it carefully. "This, too, is a clue." The tide surged, lapping at the crate. Poirot grabbed the documents, wrapping them in his coat. "We must return to the inn, Hastings. The sea will not keep these safe." The climb back was arduous, the path now slick with incoming waves. Poirot's mind raced, connecting the crate's contents to the murders. Vance's smuggling operation explained his wealth and enemies: Lionel Drake, whose rival fleet might have been undercut by illegal goods; Sylvia Harrow, perhaps scorned not just personally but financially; and Amos Finch, whose lighthouse overlooked the coves. Thomas Reed, as Vance's accountant, likely knew of these dealings, making his locked-room murder a desperate act to silence him. At the Azure Inn, Poirot spread the documents on a table in their room, his eyes scanning the coded letters. "These are not mere records, Hastings. They name contacts, someone in Saint-Barjour and beyond. The anchor symbol links to the button and locket, suggesting a network. And the map," he pointed to a marked cove, not the one they had visited. Another hiding place, perhaps. Hastings frowned. "But who attacked us? Drake? Finch? Someone else?" Poirot's gaze was distant. The figure was agile, their cloak concealing much. But the knife, it is not a fisherman Sip's tool. It is precise, like the dagger that killed Vance and Reed. "We must learn who in Saint-Agur wields such a blade." The documents revealed payments to a Mr. A.F., and Poirot's thoughts turned to Amos Finch. The lighthouse keeper's evasiveness, his presence at the inn, and his ledger entry made him a prime suspect. Yet Sylvia's locket and Drake's cane, possibly the source of the circular mark, could not be dismissed, and Eleanor Vance's calm suggested she too might know more than she revealed. As dawn broke, casting a pink glow over the sea, Poirot stood by the window, the documents safely hidden. The cove had nearly claimed them, but it had also yielded a treasure of clues. The smuggling operation was the key, he was certain, and the killer was someone tied to its profits or its betrayal. "Hastings," Poirot said, turning from the window, "we must visit this second cove, but with caution. The killer watches us, and the tide waits for no one. The smuggler Sit's Cove has spoken, but its secrets are not yet fully revealed. The sea roared outside, a reminder of the danger that lurked in Saint-Ajour's shadows. Poirot's resolve hardened. The anonymous letter had been a warning, and now, with blood already staining the shore, he would ensure no more was spilled. Chapter 8. The Clockmaker Sept's Secret. The narrow streets of Saint-Ajour wound through the town, like the gears of a clock, each turn precise, yet concealing a hidden rhythm. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes clicking against the cobblestones, led Captain Hastings toward a small shop tucked between a bakery and a chandlery. The sign above read, Tour Ren, Clockmaker, its faded letters barely legible in the morning light. The air carried the briny tang of the sea, but within the shop, Poirot anticipated a different kind of discovery, one of time and secrets. The watch found near Reginald Vance's body, stopped at 11:43, Meath had been repaired by Tobias Wren, and Poirot's little grey cells sensed that this eccentric craftsman held a piece of the puzzle that included 2 murders, a smuggler's crate, and a web of clues: the missing shoe, circular mark, pearl, fabric, cigarette, anchor button, seawater scent, sailor's knot, locket, and coded documents. "Poirot, are you sure about this fellow?" Hastings asked, eyeing the shop Sept's cluttered window, where clocks of every size ticked in chaotic unison. "He Sept's just a clockmaker. What could he know about murder?" "Mon name," Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. "Every man has a story, and a clockmaker sees time in ways others do not." The watch stopped at the hour of Vance's death. "Monsieur Wren may have seen more than gears when he repaired it." They entered the shop, a dim space filled with the relentless ticking of clocks, grandfathers, cuckoos, and pocket watches, all synchronized yet somehow discordant. Tobias Wren, a wiry man with spectacles perched on a beak-like nose, looked up from his workbench, his hands steady despite the tremor of age. His eyes, magnified by the lenses, darted nervously. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," he said, wiping his hands on an apron. "I heard you were poking about. What brings you to my little world of time?" Poirot Sit's gaze was steady. "Monsieur Wren, you repaired a watch for Monsieur Vance." "None. A gold piece, found near his body. Tell me, what was its condition when it came to you?" Wren Sit's fingers twitched, reaching for a tiny screwdriver. It was a fine watch, Swiss-made, but the mechanism was jammed, sand in the gears, and a cracked crystal. "I fixed it last week. Vance picked it up himself, in a hurry, as always." Poirot leaned closer, noting the clockmaker Sept's unease. "Sand, you say? From the shore, perhaps? And was there anything unusual about Monsieur Vance when he visited?" Wren hesitated, his eyes flicking to a shelf of ticking clocks. He was agitated, muttering about a deal gone wrong, kept checking the time, as if it were running out, said he needed the watch for a meeting at the pier. Hastings perked up. A meeting? With whom? Wren shrugged, but his hands betrayed him, fumbling with a gear. "Didn't say. Just took the watch and left. I don't set pry into folks' business." Poirot Sept's eyes narrowed. "And yet, Monsieur Wren, you know much of Saint-Ajour Sept's history, do you not? The watch, it was engraved. An anchor, perhaps?" Wren Sit's face paled. "How did you wad? Yes, an anchor, old from 20 years back. Belonged to Vance Sit's father, I think. I didn't ask questions." Poirot Sept's mind raced. The anchor motif linked the watch to the button, locket, and smuggler Sept's crate, suggesting a connection older than Vance Sept's recent dealings. 20 years, you say? Tell me, Monsieur Wren, was there a scandal in Saint-Ajour then, one involving the Vance family? Wren's hands stilled, and the shop's ticking seemed to grow louder. "You're digging deep, Mr. Poirot." "Aye. There was talk back then. Vance's father, old Cornelius, ran a shipping business. Some said it was a front for smuggling. There was a falling out with a partner, ended in a fire at the docks. One man died, and Cornelius came out richer. Folks whispered he'd betrayed his partner, but nothing was proven." But Poirot Sept's little grey cells hummed. "And this partner, who was he?" Renstev's voice dropped to a whisper. Jacob Finch, Amos Finch, Supt's father. He lost everything after the fire, died a broken man. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Amos Finch, the lighthouse keeper, had motive rooted in a decades-old grudge. The ledger entry, the fabric at the lighthouse, and Finch Sepp's presence at the inn the night of Reed Sepp's murder took on new weight. Mercy, Monsieur Wren, you have been most illuminating. As they stepped toward the door, Poirot Sepp's eyes caught a glint on the workbench, a small tool with a circular base, used for pressing gears. It matched the mark found near Van Sepp's body and at the jetty. Monsieur Wren, he said, turning back. This tool, it leaves a distinctive mark. None. Wren blinked, caught off guard. Aye, it sits for setting gears. Why? Poirot smiled enigmatically. A small detail, nothing more, but his mind was alight. The tool suggested Wren himself could be involved, or someone had access to his shop. The clockmaker's nervous demeanor hinted at more than just fear of gossip. Outside, the sea breeze carried the distant clang of a buoy. Hastings shook his head. Poirot, this case gets murkier by the day. Finch Sepp's father, scandal, smuggling. How does it all fit? Like the gears of a clock, Hastings. Poirot replied. Each piece turns another. The scandal of 20 years ago is the key to Van Sepp's death. And perhaps Reed Sepp's. We must learn more of Jacob Finch and his connection to the anchor symbol. They walked toward the pier, where the town bustled with its daily rhythm. Poirot's thoughts turned to the suspects. Eleanor Vance, too calm for a grieving widow. Sylvia Harrow, whose locket tied her to the anchor motif. Lionel Drake, whose cane might leave a circular mark. And Amos Finch, whose family history screamed motive. The documents from the cove, the sailor's knot, and the seawater scent in Reed's room pointed to a maritime conspiracy. But the clockmaker's revelation added a layer of betrayal from the past. As they passed the Seagull's Rest, Poirot paused, his gaze fixed on the sea. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had predicted this bloodshed, and the clockmaker's secret had set the timeline ticking backward. "Hastings," he said, "we must revisit the lighthouse. Monsieur Finch has much to explain, and the past, I fear, is not yet done with St. Azure." The sea roared below, its waves a constant reminder of the secrets buried in time. Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The clockmaker's shop, with its ticking heart, had revealed a motive older than the murders, and he would follow its rhythm to the truth. Chapter 9. Beneath the Pier. The night draped St. Azure in a cloak of darkness, the moon's faint glow barely piercing the heavy clouds that hung over the sea. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the pier, his silhouette sharp against the restless waves below. The air was thick with the briny scent of salt and the damp musk of seaweed, and the rhythmic crash of the tide against the pier's wooden piles swallowed all but the boldest sounds. Captain Hastings, clutching his coat against the chill, followed closely, his face a mix of determination and unease. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, piecing together the clues amassed in the investigation of Reginald Vance and Thomas Reed's murders. The missing shoe, circular mark, pearl, fabric, cigarette, anchor button, seawater scent, sailor's knot, locket, smuggler's documents, and clockmaker's tool. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had drawn them here, and the pier mentioned by old Tom Brodie as the site of Vance's argument promised answers. "Poirot, this is a risky venture," Hastings whispered, his voice nearly lost in the sea sept's roar. "Under the pier, at this hour, the tide could trap us." "Mon ami," Poirot replied, his tone calm but resolute. "The pier is where secrets whisper, hidden by the waves. Brodie spoke of an argument here, and the smuggler's documents point to this place. We must hear what the shadows conceal." His eyes gleamed, reflecting the faint moonlight as he descended a weathered ladder to the sandy strip beneath the pier. The space below was a labyrinth of shadows, the wooden piles looming like ancient sentinels, their surfaces slick with algae and barnacles. The sand was damp, sucking at Poirot's polished shoes, but his focus was unwavering. Hastings stumbled, muttering about the folly of nighttime sleuthing, but Poirot's ears were tuned to the faintest sounds beyond the wave's din. A low murmur reached them, two voices, hushed but urgent, emanating from a cluster of crates near a pile. Poirot crept closer, motioning for Hastings to stay low. The voices were unmistakable. Lionel Drake, the rival merchant, his tone clipped and commanding, and Sylvia Harrow, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You swore we'd be clear, Drake," Sylvia hissed. Vance's death was supposed to end the debts, but Reed knew too much. Now Poirot's sniffing around. "What's your plan?" Drake's reply was cold. "Quiet, Sylvia. Reed had to go. He was ready to spill everything to the police. The shipments are safe, and the evidence is gone, washed away by the tide." Poirot's mind raced. Shipments, the smuggler's crate from the cove, marked with the anchor symbol, confirmed their link to Vance's illicit dealings. The conversation tied Drake and Sylvia to both murders, but the locked room and sailor's knot suggested another hand. He leaned closer, his breath shallow, when a plank creaked above. Sylvia gasped, and a soft thud sounded as something fell into the sand. The pair froze, then fled, their footsteps scrambling up the ladder. Poirot waited, ensuring they were gone, then retrieved the object, a monogrammed handkerchief, its delicate lace embroidered with esche for Sylvia Harrow. It was damp with seawater, mirroring the scent in Reed's locked room. "Regarde, Hastings," Poirot whispered, holding it up. "Mademoiselle Harrow's handkerchief, fresh with the sea's touch. She is entangled, but is she the killer?" Hastings crouched beside a crate, frowned. Drake and Sylvia plotting together. But how did they manage the locked room? Before Poirot could respond, a surge of water rushed in, the tide turning with alarming speed. The sand grew treacherous, and a wave caught Hastings, pulling him toward the sea. "Poirot," he cried, flailing in the shallow but powerful current. Poirot, with a strength born of urgency, seized Hastings' arm, dragging him to the ladder. "Vite, mon ami. The sea is impatient tonight." They scrambled up, the water licking at their heels, and collapsed on the pier, soaked but safe. Poirot's composure returned swiftly, the handkerchief clutched tightly in his gloved hand. "This handkerchief," he said, catching his breath, "links Mademoiselle Harrow to the pier and Reed Sepp's murder. The seawater scent is no coincidence. It is a signature. And Drake Sepp's words. The evidence washed away Sepp suggests the sea is their ally, but not to Hercule Poirot." They hurried to the Azure Inn, where Poirot examined the handkerchief under a lamp. Its lace was fine, but the seawater was fresh, indicating it had been dropped that night. "Mademoiselle Harrow and Monsieur Drake are part of the smuggling," Poirot mused. "But the sailor's knot and locked room suggest another mind, someone with access and cunning." Hastings, still dripping, shook his head. "Who else, Poirot? Amos Finch? Eleanor Vance?" Poirot's Sepp's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, Hastings. The clockmaker Sepp's scandal ties Finch Sepp's father to Vance Sepp's, and Eleanor Sepp's calm hides knowledge. Mrs. Tuttle, too, hears all at the inn. The anchor symbol, on the button, locket, and crate, binds them, but the killer Sepp's hand is yet to be revealed." The sea roared outside, its waves a chorus of secrets. Poirot stood by the window, the handkerchief in hand. The anonymous letter had warned of blood, and the pier had exposed a conspiracy of greed. "Hastings," he said, "we must watch Drake and Harrow closely, but the lighthouse and cove still hold answers. The tide may hide the truth, but Hercule Poirot will uncover it." The night deepened, the pier's shadows lingering in Poirot's mind. The handkerchief was a thread in a tangled web, and the next move would bring him closer to the killer's heart. Chapter 10. The Lighthouse Beacon. The cliffs of St. Azure loomed dark and foreboding under the twilight sky, their jagged edges softened by a veil of mist rolling in from the sea. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the biting wind, climbed the winding path to the lighthouse with Captain Hastings trailing behind. The distant crash of waves echoed like a heartbeat, a constant reminder of the secrets buried in the coastal town. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, weaving together the tapestry of clues, the missing shoe, the circular mark, the pearl, the fabric, the cigarette, the anchor button, The seawater scent, the sailor's knot, the locket, the smuggler's documents, the clockmaker's tool, and the monogrammed handkerchief dropped beneath the pier. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had guided him here, and now Amos Finch, the evasive lighthouse keeper, was the key to unlocking the next piece of the puzzle. "Poirot, are you sure about this?" Hastings asked. His voice tinged with unease as they approached the lighthouse Sepp's iron door. Finch was cagey last time, and that ledger entry about a figure on the cliff. It's Sepp's suspicious, but what if he's Sepp's as dangerous? "Mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Danger is the companion of truth. Monsieur Finch knows more than he admits, and his lighthouse overlooks the coves where secrets are hidden. Tonight we shall shine a light on his silence." His mind lingered on the clockmaker's revelation of a 20-year-old scandal involving Finch's father and Vance's, a betrayal that fueled motive. The door creaked open, revealing Amos Finch, his weathered face illuminated by a flickering lantern. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Poirot and Hastings. "Back again, Mr. Poirot? The lighthouse ain't set to place for late-night visits. What do you want?" Poirot's voice was smooth but firm. "Monsieur Finch, you have seen much from your tower?"
"None."
"The night of Monsieur Vance's murder, you noted a figure on the cliff, and the night Monsieur Reed was killed, you were at the Azure Inn. I wish to see your ledger again, and to understand your connection to the Vance family." Finch's hand tightened on the lantern, his knuckles white. "I told you I keep to myself. The ledger says routine. You've no right to poke about." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The law perhaps is limited, but Hercule Poirot answers to the truth. Permit us to ascend, or I shall inform Constable Barrett of your reluctance." Grudgingly, Finch led them up the spiral staircase, the air growing colder with each step. The lighthouse's interior was austere, its walls stained with salt and time. At the top, the beacon stood dormant, its lens a silent sentinel over the sea. Poirot's gaze fell on the ledger, open on a table cluttered with charts. He flipped to the night of Reed's murder, finding a new entry. Beacon dimmed. 2 a.m. signal sent to Cove. Below it, a series of numbers, 3742, scrawled in haste. "A signal, Monsieur Finch." Poirot Sift's voice was soft but piercing. "To whom and for what purpose?" Finch's face hardened. "Just routine. Ships need signals sometimes. Nothing to do with your murders." Poirot Sift's eyes narrowed. "And yet the time, 2 a.m., is close to when Monsieur Reed was stabbed in a locked room. And the numbers, they are a code." "None. Perhaps tied to the documents we found in the cove." Finch Seb's lantern trembled, casting wild shadows. "You have been to the cove. You cert meddling in things you don't certain understand, Mr. Poirot." Hastings stepped forward, indignant. "Now see here, Finch. 2 men are dead. If you know something, out with it." Before Finch could respond, Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Hastings. Monsieur Finch will speak, but not yet. I propose a test." He moved to the beacon, studying its controls. "This light, it can be directed. None. Let us send a signal tonight to the cove marked on the smuggler's map. If someone responds, we shall know who watches." Finch's eyes widened, but he said nothing as Poirot adjusted the beacon, directing its beam toward the second cove, noted in the documents. The light flashed in a deliberate pattern, 3 long, 2 short, mimicking a maritime signal. Poirot watched the horizon, his breath steady despite the tension. Minutes passed, then a faint flicker answered from the cove, a lantern's light winking in the darkness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "Someone is there expecting a signal, Monsieur Finch. You will explain this." Finch's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "It stunts not what you think. I signal for the shipment's goods, not murder. Vance used the cove for his deals, and Reed kept the books. I just passed messages. That sips all." "And the night of the murders?" Poirot pressed. "I saw the figure on the cliff, like I wrote. Didn't see their face. As for Reed, I was at the inn. But I left before midnight. I swear it. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And the anchor symbol on the crate, the button, the locket, it ties to your father Sitt's betrayal by Van Sitt's father, does it not? Finch Thud's face twisted with pain, that Sipp's old history. My father lost everything, but I didn't Sitt kill for it. Poirot nodded, filing away Finch Sepp's words. The beacon Sepp's light faded as he turned it off, the tower falling into darkness. We shall see, Monsieur Finch. But know this, Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is revealed. As they descended, a gust of wind rattled the lighthouse, and Hastings stumbled, clutching the rail. Poirot? That signal? It Sepp's a trap that worked. But who was in the cove? Drake? Sylvia? Or another? Poirot said, his mind racing. The coded message, the signal, and Finch's half-truths pointed to a conspiracy larger than one man's grudge. Sylvia Harrow and Lionel Drake's conversation beneath the pier suggested their involvement, but Eleanor Vance's calm and Mrs. Tottle's eavesdropping could not be ignored. Outside, the sea roared, its waves a chorus of secrets. Poirot's thoughts turned to the clues, the handkerchief seawater scent, the sailor's knot, and now the coded signal. The lighthouse had illuminated a path, but the killer remained in the shadows. Hastings, he said, we must prepare for the storm. The cove beckons, but first we gather our suspects. The truth is near, and Hercule Poirot will shine a light upon it. The night deepened, the beacon's echo lingering in the mist. The anonymous letter had been a warning, and now, with the lighthouse's secrets exposed, Poirot was ready to set his own trap. Chapter 11. The Gathering Storm. The Azure Inn trembled under the fury of an approaching storm, its windows rattling as the wind howled across St. Azure's coastline. The sea churned violently, waves crashing against the pier with a ferocity that mirrored the tension within. Hercule Poirot stood in the inn's parlour, his posture impeccable despite the chaos outside. The room was filled with the key figures of his investigation: Eleanor Vance, the composed widow; Sylvia Harrow, her eyes sharp with defiance; Lionel Drake fidgeting with his cane; Amos Finch, the lighthouse keeper, his face etched with unease; and Mrs. Tuttle, the innkeeper, hovering nervously with a tray of tea. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his expression a mix of anticipation and dread. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, weaving together the tapestry of clues: the missing shoe, circular mark, pearl, fabric, cigarette, anchor button, seawater scent, sailor's knot, locket, smuggler's documents, clockmaker's tool, monogrammed handkerchief, and the coded lighthouse signal. The anonymous letter, "Blood will stain the shore," had foretold this bloodshed, and now Poirot was ready to unravel the truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the storm Sepp's roar, "we are gathered here because two men, Reginald Vance and Thomas Reed, have been murdered in St. Azure. The killer is among us, and Hercule Poirot will reveal their identity." A murmur rippled through the room, silenced by a clap of thunder. Eleanor Vance lifted her veil, her eyes calm but watchful. "Mr. Poirot, surely you don't suspect us all. This is a tragedy, not a conspiracy." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Madame, tragedy is often the mask of conspiracy. Let us begin with the facts. Monsieur Vance was stabbed on the shore, his shoe missing, a circular mark in the sand. Monsieur Reed was killed in a locked room, with seawater and a sailor's knot as clues. These are not random acts. They are linked by greed and betrayal." He paced, his gaze sweeping the room. Monsieur Vance was no mere merchant. His wealth came from smuggling, as proven by documents found in a cove, marked with an anchor symbol. This symbol appears on a button, a locket, and his watch, tying to a scandal 20 years ago, when his father betrayed Jacob Finch, father of Monsieur Amos Finch. Finch Sepp's face darkened, but he remained silent. Poirot continued. "Monsieur Reed, the accountant, knew of these dealings, making him a threat. His murder in a locked room was meant to confound us, but the seawater scent and knot suggest a maritime hand." Sylvia Harrowsell's voice was sharp. "What are you implying, Mr. Poirot? That I silm a sailor? I had nothing to do with this." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mademoiselle Harrow, your handkerchief, monogrammed with H.H., was found beneath the pier where you spoke with Monsieur Drake of a debt and Reed's meddling. Your locket, also with an anchor, ties you to Vance's operation, and Monsieur Drake, he turned to the merchant whose cane thumped nervously. Your cane leaves a circular mark like those at the crime scenes. You argued with Vance about a contract. Non. Drakeset's face reddened. I one set deny business disputes, but murder, that sept's absurd. Poirot raised a hand. Let us consider Monsieur Finch. Your father Siptzer's ruin gives you motive, and your lighthouse signaled the cove the night of Reed Siptzer's murder. The fabric found at your tower matches none here, but your presence at the inn is suspicious. Finchus, fists clenched. I signaled for shipments, not murder. I told you. I saw a figure on the cliff, but I didn't kill anyone. Mrs. Tuttle gasped, dropping her tray. Oh, Mr. Poirot, this is too much. I only run the inn. I know nothing of this. Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was unrelenting. Madame Tuttle, you hear much. You saw Mademoiselle Harrow argue with Vance and Monsieur Finch at the inn. Did you not also hear of a said delivery gone wrong, Set? Before she could answer, Eleanor Vance stood, her composure cracking. Enough, Mr. Poirot. I can't bear this any longer. I killed Reginald. He was a tyrant, bleeding the town dry with his schemes. I stabbed him on the shore, took his shoe to confuse things. I couldn't stand his betrayal any longer. The room fell silent, save for the storm-sept's howl. Hastings gaped, but Poirot-sept's eyes narrowed. Madame, your confession is brave, but incomplete. The circular mark, the smuggler-sept's documents, the locked room, your story does not account for all. And Monsieur Reed, did you kill him too? Eleanor faltered, her hands trembling. No, I only wanted Reginald gone. I don't know about Reed. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Your confession, madam, is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole. The killer is cunning, using the sea to hide their tracks. The handkerchief, the locket, the signal, all point to a conspiracy beyond one woman Sip's anger. Sylvia Harrow leapt to her feet. If she signs confessed, why accuse me? I loved Reginald even after he cast me aside. Drake pounded his cane. This is nonsense you set fishing, Poirot. Poirot Sips's voice rose, cutting through the chaos. Non, I am weaving. The truth is near, and the storm will not shield the guilty. Someone here knows how Reed was killed in a locked room, and why the anchor symbol binds these crimes. A bolt of lightning illuminated the room, casting stark shadows. Poirot's gaze lingered on each suspect, noting Sylvia's clenched fists, Drake's nervous grip, Finch's averted eyes, and Mrs. Tuttle's trembling hands. Eleanor's confession, he sensed, was a distraction, perhaps to protect another or to obscure a larger truth. Hastings, Poirot said softly, we are close. Tomorrow we shall visit the second cove, and the lighthouse will guide us. The storm gathers, but Hercule Poirot will find the calm at its center. The wind howled, the sea roared, and the anonymous letter's warning echoed in Poirot's mind. Blood had stained the shore, and the gathering storm had revealed a crack in the facade, but the true killer remained hidden, waiting for the final tide. Chapter 12. The Final Tide. The storm raged over Saint-Azure, its fury transforming the sea into a roiling beast that battered the cliffs and threatened to flood the town. Inside Vance Manor, perched precariously on a bluff, Hercule Poirot stood in the grand drawing-room, its windows shuddering under the wind's assault. The room was lit by flickering candelabras, casting eerie shadows over the assembled suspects. Eleanor Vance, her composure fraying, Sylvia Harrow, her eyes defiant, Lionel Drake gripping his cane, Amos Finch, the lighthouse keeper, his face taut, and Mrs. Tuttle wringing her hands. Captain Hastings stood by the door, his expression a mix of awe and tension. Poirot's little grey cells had woven together the clues: missing shoe, circular mark, pearl, fabric, cigarette, anchor button, seawater scent, sailor's knot, locket, smuggler's documents, clockmaker's tool, monogrammed handkerchief, and coded lighthouse signal. And now, with the anonymous letter's warning, blood will stain the shore fulfilled, he was ready to unveil the murderer. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice rising above the storm's howl, "two men, Reginald Vance and Thomas Reed, have been murdered, their deaths linked by a web of greed and betrayal. Tonight Hercule Poirot will reveal the killer, whose cunning has been no match for the little grey cells." A clap of thunder punctuated his words, and the suspects shifted uneasily. Poirot paced, his eyes sharp. "Let us begin with Monsieur Vance, stabbed on the shore, a missing shoe, a circular mark, and a pearl suggested a planned act. Monsieur Reed, killed in a locked room, was silenced for what he knew. The clues say water, a sailor's knot, and smuggler's documents point to a maritime conspiracy." He turned to Eleanor Vance. "Madam, your confession was brave but false. You claimed to kill your husband, yet the circular mark, a tool from Tobias Rensip's shop, does not match your story. You sought to protect another, none." Eleanor's lips trembled, but she remained silent. Poirot continued, addressing Sylvia Harrow. "Mademoiselle, your locket and handkerchief, both tied to the anchor symbol, place you in the smuggling operation. Your conversation with Monsieur Drake beneath the pier revealed a financial scheme, but you are no killer. Your anger is too raw, too personal." Sylvia Seck's eyes flashed. "I told you I loved Reginald, even after his betrayal." Poirot nodded, turning to Lionel Drake. "Monsieur, your cane could leave a circular mark, and your rivalry with Vance was fierce. The smuggler Sip's documents show you profited from his shipments, but your temper is not that of a cold-blooded killer." Drake pounded his cane. "Then who, Poirot, stop these games?" Poirot Stick's gaze settled on Amos Finch. "Monsieur Finch, your father Sip's ruin by Vance Sit's. Father gave you motive. Your lighthouse signaled the cove, and you were at the inn the night Reed died. But the fabric at your tower does not match the crimes, and your grief is genuine." Finch's shoulders sagged, his voice hoarse. Poirot paused, then turned to Mrs. Tuttle, who gasped. "Madame Tuttle, you have been the silent observer, always listening. You heard arguments, saw meetings, and knew of Vance Set's smuggling. The sailor Set's not in Reed Set's room. The seawater scent. It was you, was it not?" The room froze. Mrs. Tuttle Sepp's hands shook, dropping her tray. "Me, Mr. Poirot, I Sept, just an innkeeper." "None," Poirot said, his voice like steel. "You are more. Your brother was Jacob Finch, Amos's father, betrayed by Vance's father. You came to St. Azure years ago, hiding your past, and worked at the inn to watch Vance. You learned his smuggling routes, his secrets. When he threatened to expose your role in the operation, perhaps to deflect blame, you acted." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes unrelenting. "You stabbed Vance on the shore, taking his shoe to suggest a struggle. The pearl was from your own earring, dropped in haste. The circular mark came from a tool you borrowed from Wren's shop, where you often visited. For Reed, you used your innkeeper's key to enter his room, staging a locked-room murder. The sailor's knot, learned from your brother, and the seawater you carried in a flask were your signatures." Mrs. Tuttle Seber's face crumpled. "He ruined my family. Jacob died broken, and Reginald laughed at our pain. Reed was going to tell the police. I had to stop him." Hastings gaped. "Good heavens, Poirot! How did you know?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "The clues, Hastings. The handkerchief's lace matched the inn's linens, not Sylvia's. The seawater was too fresh, not from the shore. The locket's anchor tied to the smuggling, but Mrs. Tuttle's access to All in Cove Pier made her the thread that bound them. The anonymous letter was hers, a taunt to draw me here, believing she could outwit Hercule Poirot." Mrs. Tuttle sobbed, collapsing into a chair. Constable Barrett, summoned by Hastings, stepped forward to restrain her. The suspect stared, stunned as the storm roared outside, its climax mirroring the revelation. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said softly. "Greed and betrayal drove her, But justice has prevailed, the tide has turned, and the shore is cleansed. As Barrett led Mrs. Tuttle away, the room fell silent, save for the storm sip's fading howl. Eleanor whispered, "I knew she hated him, but I never thought." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, your confession protected her, but the truth cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot." The sea raged below, but its fury was spent. The anonymous letter's prophecy had been fulfilled, and Poirot's brilliance had unraveled the web. As the suspects dispersed, he stood by the window watching the waves. The final tide had come, and St. Azure would sleep easier tonight. Chapter 13. The Calm After. The storm that had ravaged St. Azure had passed, leaving the sea serene under a sky brushed with the soft pinks and golds of dawn. The cliffs, once menacing under the tempest's fury, now stood as silent guardians, their jagged edges softened by the morning light. Hercule Poirot stood on the pier, his Homburg hat tilted against the gentle breeze, his overcoat impeccable despite the salt-laden air. The town was stirring back to life, fishermen hauling nets, vendors setting up stalls and gulls wheeling overhead. But the weight of two murders, Reginald Vance and Thomas Reed, had been lifted by Poirot's brilliance. Captain Hastings, beside him, gazed at the horizon, his face a mix of relief and wonder. "Poirot, you have done it again," Hastings said, shaking his head. "Mrs. Tuttle of all people. I would never have guessed the innkeeper was behind it all. How do you do it, old chap?" Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile. "Mon ami, it is the little grey cells. They see what others overlook. The pattern in the chaos. The clues, shoe, mark, pearl, fabric, cigarette, button, seawater, knot, locket, documents, tool, handkerchief, and signal, each was a thread in a tapestry of greed and vengeance. Madame Tuttle wove it with care, but Hercule Poirot unravelled it. The revelation at Vance Manor had stunned St. Acherus. Mrs. Tuttle, driven by her brother Jacob Finch's betrayal at the hands of Vance's father, had orchestrated the murders with chilling precision. The missing shoe was a misdirection, the circular mark from a tool she'd borrowed from Tobias Wren, the pearl from her own earring. The sailor's knot and seawater scent in Reed's locked room reflected her maritime knowledge, learned from her brother. The locket, handkerchief, and anchor button, tied to her role in Vance's smuggling, which she used to fund her revenge. The coded lighthouse signal sent by Amos Finch at her behest was a distraction to mask her movements. Eleanor Vance's false confession had been a desperate attempt to shield her, but Poirot's logic had prevailed. As they walked toward the Azure Inn to collect their belongings, the town seemed lighter, its secrets washed away by the storm. Fishermen nodded respectfully to Poirot, and Miss Clara Beaumont, passing by, offered a grateful smile. "Mr. Poirot, you've saved St. Azure from its shadows. We're in your debt." Poirot bowed. "Madame, justice is its own reward, but I advise keep your Tea-Rome free of whispers in the future." Inside the inn, now under new management, Hastings packed his valise with characteristic enthusiasm. "What steps next, Poirot? Back to London? Or another adventure?" Poirot sits. Eyes twinkled. A rest, perhaps, though the world seldom allows it. The human heart, Hastings, is a sea of motives. Greed, love, revenge. It is never still, and thus neither is Hercule Poirot. He paused by the window, gazing at the sea. "Consider, mon ami, the nature of justice. Madame Tuttle sought it for her brother Sep's ruin, yet her path led to bloodshed. Is vengeance justice, or merely another crime? These are the questions that linger when the case is closed." Hastings frowned. "You said we're getting philosophical, Poirot. I say, she killed two men. She got what she deserved." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly. "But the heart seeks balance, and balance is not always found in blood." As they prepared to depart, a young boy approached, clutching a sealed envelope. "For Mr. Poirot, sir," he said, then scampered off. Poirot opened it, his eyes narrowing at the familiar scrawl. "The sea hides more than you know. Look to the northern cove before you leave." It was unsigned, echoing the anonymous letter that had drawn him to St. Azure. Hastings, Poirot said, folding the letter. It seems our holiday is not quite over. A northern cove, you say. We shall investigate, but with caution. They took a final walk along the shore, the sand smooth where the storm had swept it clean. The northern cove, smaller and less frequented, was empty, save for a single buoy bobbing in the tide. Poirot examined it, finding no clues, but his mind was alert. A taunt, perhaps, or a genuine warning. The sea keeps its secrets, but Hercule Poirot will be ready. As they boarded the train to London, St. Azure receded into the distance, its pier and cliffs bathed in sunlight. Hastings leaned back, content. Well, Poirot, at least we had a bit of a holiday, storm and all. Poirot smiled, his gaze distant. A holiday, mon ami. None. It was a journey into the human soul, and where there are souls, there are mysteries. We shall meet them again. The train whistle blew, and the sea faded from view, its calm surface belying the turmoil it had witnessed. Poirot's hand rested on the letter in his pocket, a promise of future enigmas. For now, St. Azure was at peace, but the world, like the tide, was ever changing, and Hercule Poirot would be waiting.